Hi. Hey. Uh, Welcome, everyone. I'm Greg, the CEO of FWB. And how's everyone doing? Does everyone have a good time? Good, good. Woo! I see so many smiles, and that makes us so happy. So keep smiling. I have the pleasure today of interviewing Tiago Sada. Welcome to the stage. Welcome back to the stage.
Thank you.
We had what I actually think is a very historic panel yesterday with Worldcoin, Base, and Optimism for the first time ever. And that was not in my plans, but I think we'll have to talk about it because I've been thinking about it. But you are the head of product and engineering and design for Tools for Humanity, and the innovative team contributing to Worldcoin. Your journey is really, really inspiring. Having grown up in Mexico in a lower middle class family, and your path took a significant turn when you earned a scholarship to study in the United States, where you became an expert in robotics, which is very cool. Before joining the crypto space, you founded and led the fintech startup, which you successfully exited, and your initial skepticism towards cryptocurrency transformed into advocacy, particularly influenced by Ethereum's potential to digitize and transform previously undigitalizable aspects of our lives. Now you are on a mission to revolutionize digital identity and decentralization through Worldcoin. And what I like about our conversation before and what we're going to share today, it's not just about technology. It's deeply rooted in your own personal values and experiences, which I feel gets lost when we talk a lot about AI. You have a human-centric approach, and you bring that to the pressing challenges today. We're going to talk about your insights, perspectives, AI, blockchain, some philosophy, and why not. So one framing for this, we are now in month 8 or 9 of a year-long partnership with Worldcoin. Big thank you to John, CMO out there, for trusting us in this. When we announced it, to say that it was slightly contentious within the DAO was interesting enough. I got a lot of very, very lovely messages from people I didn't know. And it was interesting to me because I was in a car on a road trip, and my phone just started going like this, and when we announced it, I was like, oh, and I was caught very much by surprise, by people's just deep hatred of us doing this. What's been amazing is that the Worldcoin people have not only been aware of where you have, but have been amazing partners. It wasn't like we're going to do this one thing and art wash a project together. It's a very amazing long-term partnership. And what kind of struck me about this is that the AI has always, been perceived as good, bad, or otherwise in culture. It has a long history going back to Isaac Asimov and everything before. So today I want to also make sure that we frame this in this didn't start 2 years ago. This has been a preoccupation of humans ever since the introduction of computers and a potential sentient being. So a lot of this we're going to talk about is things just didn't start last week or a year ago or 10 years ago. This has been a preoccupation for all of us. But before we get to that, I want to go to your background. Can you just share a little bit more about your experiences in growing up in Mexico and how that influenced your work in AI and Web3?
Yeah, for sure. So first things first, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for having me. Just like you had us on that town hall after we announced the partnership, and we got to talk about it. That was quite a fun one. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit all the main points, and you made it sound way more exciting than it is. But I grew up in Mexico, pretty normal, Catholic family in Mexico. And then at some point, through life, I ended up getting into technology through jailbreaking, actually. I saved up, bought an iPod Touch. I didn't have money left to buy the games, so I just started jailbreaking to be able to play the games that I wanted, that's the truth. And through that, I met a bunch of friends with whom, like I said, eventually I started building robots with. Were pretty good, and so at some point through that, I got a scholarship to come to the US. And very quickly, that only lasted for 2 years because, say, I dropped out and went back to Mexico to start a fintech. And I think that something that perhaps I took for granted, growing up in Mexico and then started the fintech there, is that while in the bubble of the US, we just have access to so many amazing things, that's just not the case in the world. And the default is doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, or not. My rich friends did not have a bank account, right? It was just not something you would have, or many of these other things. And so that for me was like very clear, and it was very easy to work on that, try to fix that in Mexico. Eventually we scaled that to LATAM. But now at Worldcoin, I get to see, for example, the first place I ever onboarded people was in Norway. Actually, I went to for like a week or so with an orb to Oslo, and I was just walking around the streets of Norway onboarding people. And so I have gotten to see how this is different in each part of the world, but I carry very deeply with me just like how important some of these very fundamental tools that we take for granted are. Um, and so that's been part of it. And then the other side of things is, I think in Mexico we have a bit of like an irreverence towards authority and towards the status quo that, again, I took for granted growing up, but I think has been useful as I've continued to grow and in particular start to think about crypto and what does it take to upgrade the financial system. Sometimes you say things that are uncomfortable for some people, but for me it's just very natural. That's how I grew up. That's like culture in Mexico. You say things the way that you think you are. Like we laugh even about death, right? We have a day of the dead. We laugh about everything. We challenge things. And so I think that's been like having like no taboos has also just allowed me to think about everything from scratch and like made up my mind about it.
Yeah. When we started working with you, we also began our conversations with Stellar, and I don't know if anyone saw the presentation yesterday about a town that essentially like no one had bank accounts because of like narco trafficking, and how crypto has really changed that. And so it's been interesting to see your approach to it, and also particularly like a not first world countries approach to systems and protection. Asimov's iRobot introduces a number of ethical considerations for AI many decades ago. I'm curious about your upbringing, about like how your ethics and values have influenced your work.
So I think the interesting thing about the Asimov rules is when you take a step back, like what they say is like technology or robotics in his case should be at the service of humanity. Like that's basically what he's saying, right? And that always resonated with me, particularly as I said, like my upbringing is just like very Christian values. Like I believe in like every human is worth something simply for being a human, and I think that's like incredibly important. And so that's the interesting thing about like the Asimov principles, right? Like he has different rules for like how essentially technology should defer to humans, right? Not hurt them, not lie to them, obey them, this and that. But I think it all starts with a human, right? And I think one of the things that we perhaps, or at least I didn't see coming, is that the first challenge to be able to comply with those rules was going to be how do you even know what a human is in the first place, right? Because today, or at least when I was building robots, you knew what the human was, and then you get to build all of the rules and all the programming to make that happen. But now we're in a world where like that's not the more challenging part. The challenging part, I would argue, is knowing who to treat that way in the first place. And that is at the core of like a lot of what I think about nowadays, what we think a lot about at WorldCoin, because at least I do very much think that no matter how intelligent an AI system is, everything that we build should have humans at the center and should be at the service of humans, not humans at the service of technology.
It's interesting that you kind of went all in with AI, but you were an early skeptic of crypto, which I found you can choose one technology, be like, that's fine, like, sentient LLMs, but crypto is bad. So I'm curious, like, what was it about the journey? What brought the skepticism, and then what converted you over time?
Yeah, I'm sure that's a, that's a that's a fun thing to say. Look, I mean, the truth is, when I went to college in the U.S. in like 2015, my roommate showed me Bitcoin for the first time, and we bought a little bit just for like shit of it, and like I'm glad I did, but I was never like super into it, right? I never read the white paper. It was not something that I took very seriously. When eventually we started our company, and our company was basically me and I had a couple of roommates, one from Honduras and one from Venezuela. We're literally like on a Thursday night, like laying down in the carpet at like 2 a.m. And we're just talking like, dude, why don't we have Venmo in Mexico and in like Venezuela and that just like stuck with me, right? And so that was like the premise of what I started. I went back home and I told my friends like, okay, so hear me out. There's this like Venmo app in the US. We're gonna build that for Mexico. It turns out it was a terrible idea to build it that way, and we successfully like adjusted what exactly it was. But as we started doing that, for us, I mean, to be honest, we were just learning how to build apps in the first place. So like crypto wasn't even like we were even thinking about that. We were learning how to build an Android app because we have a YC interview next week, and we told them we had an Android app. So now we have to build the thing. And And so as we got into that, we just like built a database, and like that's how we were moving money. And that's when like the 2017 like bull run started happening, right? And then as we started fundraising, like every investor conversation was like, "Oh, are you using a blockchain?" Right? And it wasn't even crypto. And we went, okay, let's go look at that. And we looked at blockchains in 2017. And it turns out that like they sucked for what we were trying to do, right? Like you cannot do real-time payments. It's super expensive. Like the UX is horrible. Like, no, the way you solve the problem we were trying to solve is with a database, at least back then, right? And so I had to become very good at explaining to investors why blockchain sucked and why you had to build it our way, because otherwise our company was going to die. And the truth is that just didn't leave me a lot of like mental bandwidth to think about how this technology is evolving and like where it can go, right? I was just like I was a 20-year-old running a company trying to focus on not dying and like just want to scale my Venmo for Mexico. Eventually like you said, we solved that, we scaled it across LATAM, and I took a year off where my rule was the first half of the year I don't want to think about anything related to what's next. So I did a bunch of random stuff. I studied ants and did a couch surfing tour and did a family tree and lived in the desert with my friends and like did a bunch of like weird shit. And the second half of it was to think about what I was going to do next. And I started having like some ideas, and you'd be like, well, this is great, but if crypto works out, you wouldn't build that this way. Like, okay, let's put that on the shelf. And then here's another idea. Well, but if crypto is actually going to happen, like you don't even need this in the first place, right? And so I got to that point with like 2 or 3 things. And I was like, well, then I guess I sort of need to make up my mind. Like, will crypto happen or not? Because if it won't, then I should just build these things and like, let's go. And if it will happen, then like why build better boats when like planes and spaceships are about to happen? And so my first stop was the Bitcoin white paper. And I think the thing that I understood there that I hadn't before, the thing that resonated with me was it wasn't decentralization for decentralization's sake. It was decentralization to be able to digitalize. And digitalization is something that I actually find that you can build better products because they're digital, right? I think as much as I care about decentralization from a values perspective, I don't think values is like what builds winning products. I think better products is what people use. And so that was exciting. And then through a couple of friends, John Palmer, Alex Masmej, a couple of people who just like started crypto pilling me, I found my way to Ethereum, and I realized like, hey, actually these things are not, all these tokens, you aren't meant to go and like buy bread with like your kick token. Like these are like, you have like different mental models for like each of these tokens are, right? And they're just, at the end of the day, they're, instead of storing information, they're storing like value. And you can, and when you're digitalizing these things and you're building in these open systems that are decentralized, it turns out they're composable. And that for me was just like incredible, right? Like being building in fintech for like the past 5 years, now knowing that I can just like take a system without them knowing and like over the weekend build something that would have taken me a year was just insane. And so that's what got me back into it. And then over time, I still think, don't get me wrong, I still think like a significant part of the space doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think enough of it is so incredibly profound and so incredibly important that it's worth spending a lot of time and energy and money on.
One of the things that I think has been confusing in the space is the concept of decentralized AI. I feel crypto and AI have been pitted in like a VC battle of, crypto is dead, because now we're going to invest in AI, and AI will die, and we'll invest in crypto. About 6 months ago, 7 months ago, you started hearing about decentralized AI, and you're like, what does that mean? And people would just mumble an answer. So I'm curious what your what your perception of decentralized AI is and how it fits into Tools for Humanity and Worldcoin.
So the truth is, I have no idea. If such a thing as decentralized AI can exist, I think it's awesome, right? I don't know enough technically about AI to say whether it's possible or not, or whether by definition a centralized AI or a closed source AI will always be better. I hope not, but I don't know. What I do know is that Worldcoin comes from like 3 fundamental things, right? Like the premise for Worldcoin is, hey, AI is going to advance much faster than all of us think it will, and as exciting as that is, and it's probably the biggest technological development of like the next century, it's going to cause some challenges, right? And there's like specifically 3 buckets that we look at. There's the economic side of things, like some people are going to lose their jobs, and there will be a time between their old jobs and when they get new jobs, right? And so you need to find a way to help people and to fairly distribute all of the wealth that is generated with the systems. Number two, there is like proof of personhood, which is what I think has been the most pressing problem recently, which is how do you know what's a human and what's a bot online, right? And like everything that comes from that. And number three, which isn't talked a lot about, but you actually hear Sam speak to it if you go back and look at some of the early videos from the project, is how do you democratize AI, right? And that means something as simple as how do you ensure that everyone has fair access to it, right? That if there's limited compute, you can distribute that so that everyone has a fair chance to use it. But perhaps more interestingly is how can you think about different governance models, because these systems are probably too important and too powerful for one person or one company to control, right? And so I don't know if that is a one person, one vote democracy. I don't know. I think like there's like 10,000 experiments that we need to run. I do know that most of them start with the primitive of a person. And when you have the primitive of a person, you can come up with like all sorts of schemes for how to control these models. And so we're focused on solving that part of the equation, and it'll be up to AI companies to then take the primitives of the protocols that we're helping build to solve those problems. But to be honest, in terms of like decentralized AI, I don't know enough about it to speak to it.
Someone will finally answer me. Yeah. So if any of you have been over to the mall, we have a gallery show up. It's the third iteration of a series that started off in Mexico City called The Paradox of Personhood. It's an amazing collaboration. Has anyone been to the mall? Has anyone seen it? Okay, great. If you haven't, it's very, very cool. We did in Mexico, we did in Tokyo with our partners at Push, and now we're here and we're going to go to Argentina in a couple weeks. What's been interesting about that is that as we travel to each city, we write a new essay that talks about the localized perception of an interaction with AI and the technology. And what's kind of really come out is the concept of self-identity. You're both concerned with making sure that you're a real person, but you also don't want to take away the fact for people to be creative, anonymous. And so the premise of Worldcoin is like, we can say you're a real person, but that's kind of all we're going to do. So I'm curious that as you're building this technology, how does the concept of like self-identity and personhood enter into it as you're building the authentication side of things?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question. We talk a lot about identity and just how much we want to do in it. And I think that the conclusion that we've come to historically, and I don't know where the community will go in the future, but at least as we were incepting the project and as we've continued to work on it, we've made the decision of only focusing on what we call proof of personhood, which is we don't care about who you are, we don't care anything about you. The only thing that matters is, are you a real and unique person, yes or no? And many VCs and many like product people that come and interview at the company, this and that, they'll pitch amazing, wonderful things that you could do if you expanded into like broader identity, right? And don't get me wrong, I think those things are necessary. And I don't know if our community or a different community will be the ones to figure it out. But it's just so difficult to get identity right that for now, we've said, we think that if all Worldcoin contributes to the world is proof of personhood, that is enough, and that is incredibly valuable. And so for us, what that means is everything you do is anonymous through a new type of cryptography called zero-knowledge proofs, where at every step of the way, when you're signing into an app with your World ID or when you're verifying an account with your World ID, all you're doing is you're telling that app, hey, I'm a real and unique person that hasn't done this thing before, but you cannot learn anything about me. And so, for example, if you are claiming a coupon at a Shopify store with the Shopify plugin, you can say, hey, I've never claimed this 30% discount on your store. I'm a client for the first time, and so I'm going to claim it. And in the future, you can't do that again. But that store doesn't learn anything about you. That has trade-offs, right? Because that store would probably want to know like your age and like what are your buying habits and things like that. We're not super interested in that. The problem that we're trying to solve is proof of personhood. And so there's not a ton that I can say about identity because we've just tried to leave that to people, right? And interestingly, one of the things that the protocol enables is pseudonyms. So for example, if an app like Twitter wants to integrate World ID, one of the cool things that app can do is they can say, you know what, as a person, you get to have 10 Twitter accounts. So you can have up to 10 Twitter accounts with a blue check mark of you've been verified by World ID, but in a way in which not even Twitter knows that they are all owned by the same person. And so you as a human can have as many identities as you want, or as that application will let you, in a way in which not only the world, but the application itself doesn't know that you are the same person. And so that's been very important for us as we build the first generations of the protocol. And it will be interesting to see what type of identity primitives either these or other communities build on top of it.
You mentioned that AI is going to evolve way faster than we can concept, but the tools are being designed by humans. So I'm curious how you predict the future, or how far out are you able to anticipate the needs? And then kind of second part is like, how adaptive are you when AI makes a jump and changes our perception of what's possible within the technology?
Yeah, it's super hard. One of the things that I think is very counterintuitive how fast AI moves. I mentioned during my sabbatical, I lived for a few months in the desert with my friends, and it was a bunch of like AI people before AI was a thing. And there was this one guy. We would do like demos every week of what we were building, and he would come with like this Notion page, and he would write happy, and he would press a button, and the thing would load, and then the words happy would come up, but now it would have like flowers or like sunshine behind it, right? And then you would write cold, and then it would like process, like take like 2 minutes, and then it would be like the word cold with like icicles, and we were all like, oh, like that's cute, like whatever, like nice demo. And I was catching up with people from the house 6 months later, and they were like, hey, did you see David's project? I was like, no, what? He's like, yeah, it's called Midjourney now. I was like, holy shit, okay. And like I've seen that through like talking with Sam and through like different things just across the board. I think it's very difficult to predict. I think some things are faster than you would expect, some things are slower than you would expect. I think that what we try to do is think just from first principles, like what are the things that will break, right? What are the things that you will not be able to trust? And so, for example, like verifying a passport with a selfie and like turning your face, like it seems like every 2 weeks, like companies come up with like, now you have to like draw a snowman with your nose or something like that. But like all of those, like when you take it to the limit, right? You don't know if it's in 2 months, in 10 months, in 2 years, in 5 years, all of that will be fakeable, right? And so I think that what it takes is thinking about what will never be fakeable, right? Or what will be like incredibly difficult. One of those things is a real person showing up to a physical space. And as annoying as that is really hard to fake with a deep fake, right? And so we put a lot of thought into it, and this is why like the white paper is incredibly long, but it's very difficult to predict timelines. I have no idea how to predict timelines, to be honest.
There has been, as we've talked about, criticism and misperceptions about Worldcoin. I think Vitalik most famously said some pretty, had some good critiques, and then also recently commended you guys. Where do you think people's misperceptions are? What have you gotten wrong? And how do you take these criticisms in and adjust the path?
Yeah. So I'll start with the second part of the question, like the Vitalik thing. I actually love the Vitalik paper. Like, I don't know if you've read it. Like, Vitalik wrote his blog post on the importance of proof of personhood. We've been talking with Vitalik for like a long time now, and he's like very candid about like what he likes and what he doesn't like. His position has always been the same, at least as I understand it, which is this is an incredibly important primitive. If you are building it with real-world verification, it's much harder to decentralize than if it was purely digital. And like I agree, like definitely decentralizing hardware and decentralizing real-world operations is like way harder. At least as I read his blog post and like as I understand it when like I talk with him about it, it's not a criticism. It's just saying like, hey, stating like, hey, this is a challenge that the project is going to have. As you said, I think the project has continued to make strides with whether it's open sourcing or decentralizing more and more components. And so I think on the Vitalik thing, I mean, there's a reason why he posted it the day the project came out, right? Because he thought like he was excited about the project coming out despite the challenges that he was going to have. I think in general, I think the questions are super valid. Like the first time I ever heard about Worldcoin, it was like 6 months before I joined, and I was like, "What the heck is that?" Like this is. I mean, the headline writes itself, right? You're going around the world scanning people's eyes with a shiny ball to give them free crypto. Like this is, and I think the way what I would say is, one of the things that I hear the most, that people are surprised by, is not just that Worldcoin is private, or not just that Worldcoin doesn't infringe freedom, but that Worldcoin exists precisely for those reasons. And that when you dive into it, you understand that the whole system exists so that we don't all have to KYC and authenticate with our real identities, like what we're doing online, right? And that the reason everything is self-custodial and everything goes through CKPs and all of these sophisticated systems is precisely so that governments or companies or whoever it is cannot censor you, which we think is things that will happen more and more as you go. It's super counterintuitive, and I really wish, I think we've tried a lot. I think part of like why there's this perception if we've just not been good at telling the story, and I think we've gotten better at that in recent years, but like at the end of the day, when every other biometric project is just not private, the default is to assume it's not private, right? And so I think a lot of that has been on us in terms of how we communicate about it. It's complicated ideas that it's difficult to explain how they work. But what I'm always encouraged by is, without exception, anytime someone looks deep into the system, they might not agree that it's necessary, but they will more often than not come out saying, at least it's built the right way, right? Or as good as you could build something like this. And I think that that's something I'm very proud of. And of course, I would love for everyone to love us, right? Because we put a ton of like work and effort and love into everything we build. Like teams work super hard, but at the end of the day, like we have conviction that the world needs this and that the alternative is just horrible. So we're gonna keep running at it. And if we're right, then like at least we'll be able to provide this to the world. And if we're wrong, then like that's fine. We're wrong.
In closing, just to bring it back, what advice would you give to people who are either concerned about the intersection of AI and human values, or for people who are looking to build in the space, and some considerations for making projects in this area?
Look, I said it yesterday, and I think I'll close with the same thing. I'm very excited about infrastructure and protocols and all those things, and we contribute to some of those. I think that both crypto and AI are at a point where, yes, you can build more infrastructure, but man, do we need products. Like we just need people willing to take opinions, which is what I said yesterday, and build things that they believe in that might not be for everyone. In fact, like the best products are not for everyone, but you just solve problems that you believe in a way that you care about with these technologies. And I think much more than anything I could say about how to use this technology or that technology is just like have the guts to build products that you believe in using these things, because they're just sitting there waiting for people to do so. So that's personally what I'm most excited about. It might not be what ends up being the most impactful but is what I think the most about is like how do you take these technologies and actually start delivering real value to real people in their day-to-day lives.
Great. Tiago, thank you so much. Please go check out the Precipice of Personhood over in the mall, and thanks for coming.
Thank you.